Hi. Another big contender at the Oscars this year, hopefully, will be Dolemite is My Name, directed by Craig Brewer, written by Larry Alexander, and I forget the other guy's name, but the writers of Ed Wood and The People vs. Larry Flint, and starring and produced by Eddie Murphy. It's a big comeback vehicle for Murphy because his work's been a bit scattershot for the last 20 years, and it's nice to see him in a big, major leading role on a project that he's clearly very concerned about doing correctly rather than just another crappy family movie. It's the story of Rudy Ray Moore, who worked himself up from being a comedian struggling on the circuit to completely reinventing his act, creating this character of Dolemite, a kind of superhero pimp who would speak in rhyme and deliver these fanciful boasts and stories as he performed, becoming a hugely successful recording artist with a string of hit comedy albums, and eventually making his own movie. The focus of the story is on the making of the movie itself, which he produced for a shoestring. It was largely the work of his friends and himself, plus a few young film students who knew all the technical stuff. And when the film was eventually released, it became a surprise smash hit and was one of the highest grossing films of the year. I was delighted by it. I found it enormously entertaining. The problem, though, is that it's it's so like Ed Wood. It's quite hard to talk about it on its own terms. It's very, very similar to Ed Wood. The difference being that the central character of Moore is a very different figure from Wood himself, and the emphasis on African American subculture, excuse me, creates a very different tone within the story. There is a lot of talk about material and music and comedy in films that don't cater for black audiences. There's a scene where Rudy and some of his friends go to see The Front Page with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, and the white audience thinks it's hilarious, but they're just sitting there in silence, wondering why people are finding this funny, because they're from a totally different background. Which is why when Dolemite comes out, audiences love it, because it's a totally different change of pace. It's something totally original and fresh and different. This crazy action-adventure comedy romance with this over-the-top leading man who can't really act and can't really do all the action scenes, but he's throwing himself into it, and everyone's throwing themselves into it. It's anchored by a terrific performance from Eddie Murphy, who gets to balance doing really full-on comedy, as he can do so brilliantly, with more serious scenes where he talks about how he wants to make a mark for himself, how he comes from a very tough background where he was always told that he was worthless, and he wants to fight against that and create something of value, even if it's just a comedy career, even if it's making a movie. Those are things that have value. The script is strong, but again, the plot progression, for the most part, feels very similar to that of Ed Wood. So, although I did like it a great deal, and I would definitely recommend it, I don't think it's maybe as complex and as original as it ought to be. It does say interesting things about the way that the entertainment industry is so dominated by catering to white audiences, with little left for black and African American audiences. But that's not necessarily the focus of the film. The focus of the film is on the character of Moore himself. So it's very good and very entertaining, but it's not perhaps top flight, although Eddie Murphy's performance is fantastic.